The coffee was warm in her hands, the evening breeze touched her face with unexpected gentleness, and the city lights blinked in the distance like indifferent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Genevieve Thornton, 42 years old, had no idea that in the next 10 minutes, the man standing before her with red, swollen eyes would destroy everything she had built over 12 years of marriage. She took another sip, savoring what would be the last moment of peace she would know for a very long time. Grant appeared on the balcony, his 39-year-old frame seeming somehow smaller than usual, his shoulders hunched forward as if carrying an invisible weight. His hands trembled visibly as he gripped the doorframe, and when he spoke, his voice cracked in a way she had never heard before. "Honey, I need to tell you something," he said, and there was something in his tone, something raw and desperate, that made her stomach drop even before she understood why. She set the green ceramic mug down on the small glass table between them, her wedding ring catching the fading sunlight for just a moment. The gesture was automatic, mechanical, as if some part of her brain already knew that whatever came next would require both hands free, would require her full attention, would require every ounce of strength she had cultivated over years of difficult financial negotiations and high-stakes business meetings. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. He couldn't look at her, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the balcony railing, out toward the city that continued its evening routine, completely unaware of the private catastrophe unfolding in this small corner of the world. "I've been seeing someone," he said, and the words hung in the air between them like poison. "For 5 months. A photographer I met at a corporate event back in February. Her name is—" He paused, swallowed hard, then continued. "Her name doesn't matter. What matters is that I betrayed you, and I can't carry this anymore. 5 months. 150 days. Genevieve's mind, trained by years of financial analysis and meticulous attention to detail, immediately began calculating, sorting through memories, searching for signs she had missed. February. That was when he had started taking more overnight trips, when he had suddenly become very interested in his appearance again, when he had started showering immediately upon arriving home instead of collapsing on the couch as he usually did after long events. How had she not seen it? Or had she seen it and simply chosen not to believe what her instincts were screaming at her? 5 months, she repeated, her voice still eerily calm. It was the same tone she used when reviewing a client's catastrophic financial decisions, that professional detachment that allowed her to see clearly through chaos. But her hands, resting now on her lap, had begun to tremble slightly. 150 days of lies. Every time you kissed me, every time you said you loved me, every time we made plans for our future, you were coming straight from her arms. He flinched at her words, but still couldn't meet her eyes. It wasn't like that. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. I didn't plan this. It just happened, and then it kept happening, and I didn't know how to stop it, how to tell you, how to what? She interrupted, and now there was an edge to her voice, sharp as broken glass. How to be a decent human being. How to honor the vows you made 12 years ago. How to respect the woman who built a life with you, who supported your career, who trusted you completely. She stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the balcony floor with a harsh sound that made him jump. "Tell me everything. Every detail. I want to know exactly what I've been living through while thinking I was in a real marriage." And so he told her. The words came out in a rush now, as if a dam had broken, and Genevieve listened with that same terrifying calm, her mind automatically cataloging every piece of information like evidence in a case file. They had met at a corporate event he was coordinating in early February, a product launch for a tech company. She was the photographer hired to document the event. They had talked during a break, exchanged numbers for professional reasons, or so he claimed. Then there were text messages. Innocent at first, then less innocent. Then coffee, Just coffee, he insisted, as if that somehow made it better. Then drinks. Then a kiss in a parking lot that led to a hotel room that same night. After that, it became regular. Once a week at first, then twice, then whenever they could manage it. He used the joint credit card, their credit card, the one they shared for household expenses and emergencies, to pay for hotel rooms. Cheap ones at first, he admitted, with something that might have been shame. Then nicer ones, as the affair progressed. The Embassy Suites downtown became their regular spot. Room 223, he said, and Genevieve filed that detail away, without knowing why it mattered, but knowing somehow that it did. But the worst part, the detail that made her legs suddenly weak, was the weekend trip. 3 weeks ago, he had told her he needed to go to a corporate event 2 hours away, a weekend-long conference that required his presence. She had kissed him goodbye on Friday morning, told him to drive safely, texted him good night both nights, and he had responded each time, loving messages about missing her, about wishing he was home, about counting down until he could see her again. Every single word had been a lie. He hadn't been at any conference. He had been at a bed and breakfast in the countryside with his mistress, spending an entire weekend playing house, while his actual wife sat at home planning their summer vacation. "I need her number," Genevieve said suddenly, her voice cutting through his confession. "Right now. Give me her phone number." Grant's head snapped up, his eyes finally meeting hers, and there was fear in them now. "Why? What are you going to do?" "That's not your concern anymore," she replied, and there was something in her tone that made it clear this wasn't a request. "You destroyed any right to question my decisions about 10 minutes ago. Give me the number. Now." With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and read off the digits. Genevieve pulled out her own phone, her fingers steady despite the storm raging inside her chest, and dialed. She put it on speaker, setting the phone on the glass table between them, and waited. Grant's face had gone pale, his mouth opening as if to protest, but no sound came out. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious and uncertain. "Hello? Is this the woman who's been sleeping with Grant Thornton?" Genevieve asked, her voice clear and cold. She watched her husband's face crumple, watched him realize that there would be no hiding, no controlling the narrative, no way to minimize what he had done. There was a long pause on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "Who is this?" "I'm his wife," Genevieve said simply. "The one he's been married to for 12 years, while he's been sneaking around with you for 5 months. I'm calling because I thought you should know that the man you've been risking your relationship for, whoever you think he is a liar. And I thought you should know that whatever fantasy you two have been living ends right now." I didn't know he was married," the woman stammered, but there was something false in her tone, something that suggested this was a lie they both knew wouldn't hold. "You didn't know," Genevieve repeated flatly. "A man in his late 30s who only sees you at hotels and can never stay the night, who never invites you to his home, who's always careful about being seen together in public places. You didn't know." She paused, letting that sink in. "But that's not even why I called. I called because I wanted to ask you something. Hold on one moment." Her fingers flew across her phone screen, searching social media with the kind of focused intensity she usually reserved for researching investment opportunities for clients. It took less than 3 minutes to find what she was looking for. The photographer's business page led to her personal profile, which led to recent posts showing a young man with his arm around her, smiling widely. Posts about wedding planning, posts about venue shopping, posts about choosing flowers and cakes, and celebrating their upcoming marriage. "I'm looking at your social media right now," Genevieve said, her voice still unnervingly calm. "Beautiful photos, by the way. Very professional. And I'm seeing a lot of posts about your engagement. Your fiancé looks like a nice man. Does he know that while you're planning a wedding with him, you've been having an affair with my husband?" The silence on the other end was deafening. Genevieve could hear the woman's breathing quicken, could practically feel the panic setting in. That's different, she finally said, her voice much smaller now. You don't understand. The pressure, the wedding planning, it was all too much. And I needed— You needed what? Genevieve interrupted. An escape? A distraction? Someone else's husband to make you feel special while you planned to marry someone else? She laughed, but it was a hollow sound, completely devoid of humor. Let me ask you something directly. Did you ever, at any point, think you were going to leave your fiancé for Grant? Did you ever think this was real? That you were building something that could last? Another pause, longer this time. When the woman spoke again, her voice was defensive, sharp. No, okay? No, I never thought that. It was just something that happened. He was there, and he paid attention to me, and it felt good to feel wanted without all the weight of forever attached to it. It wasn't supposed to mean anything serious. Genevieve glanced at Grant, whose face had gone from pale to completely ashen. He was staring at the phone as if it had physically struck him, his mouth hanging slightly open. She realized in that moment that he had believed it was more. He had believed that this woman cared about him, wanted him, that their affair was something meaningful beyond the physical. And now he was hearing, in real time, that he had destroyed his marriage for someone who had never taken him seriously at all. So my husband, Genevieve said slowly, deliberately, destroyed 12 years of marriage, broke vows, lied constantly, used our money to pay for hotel rooms, spent an entire weekend pretending to be at a work conference while he was actually with you, all for something that you're now telling me meant nothing to you. He was just convenient, just a temporary distraction while you planned your real life with someone else. I didn't ask him to fall in love with me, the woman said, and there was anger in her voice now. That's not my fault. We're adults. He made his own choices. You're absolutely right, Genevieve agreed. He did make his own choices. 150 days worth of choices. And now he gets to live with the consequences of every single one of them. She paused, then added, and so do you, because your fiancé deserves to know the truth before he makes the biggest mistake of his life. Just like I deserve to know before I wasted another day of mine. You wouldn't, the woman said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now, fear creeping in. Watch me, Genevieve said simply, and ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute. Grant was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between horror and disbelief, and a dawning realization of just how thoroughly he had miscalculated everything. The woman he had betrayed was not going to crumble quietly. The woman he had betrayed was not going to make this easy. The woman he had betrayed was going to make sure that everyone involved faced the full weight of their actions. Jen, he started, using the nickname he hadn't earned the right to use anymore. Please, don't do anything rash. Can we just talk about this? Can we figure out how to fix this? She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This man who had shared her bed, her home, her life for 12 years, who had made promises and plans and painted pictures of their future together, was a complete stranger. She didn't know him at all. Maybe she never had. Fix this? She repeated, and her voice was soft now, dangerously soft. Grant, you didn't break something that can be fixed. You burned it to the ground. You took 12 years of trust and love and partnership, and you set it on fire for someone who just admitted she never even cared about you. She picked up her coffee mug, still half full, now cold. You need to leave. Tonight. Right now. Pack a bag with whatever you need for a few days. Tomorrow you can come back when I'm at work and get the rest of your things. But you are not sleeping in this house, in our bed, for one more night. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, and she almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. I don't care, she said honestly. Call a friend. Get a hotel room. Use that joint credit card one more time. I'm sure there's still credit available after all the times you used it to betray me. but you will not stay here." He opened his mouth to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He nodded once, slowly, and walked back into the apartment. Genevieve stood alone on the balcony, listening to the sounds of him moving through their home, opening drawers, zipping a suitcase. The city lights continued their indifferent blinking. Somewhere below, people were living their normal lives, having normal evenings, completely unaware that in this apartment, everything had just changed forever. It took him 20 minutes to pack. When he came back to the balcony, overnight bag in hand, he tried one more time. "Jen, I love you. I know I messed up horribly, but I love you, and I want to find a way through this." She didn't turn around, didn't look at him. 5 months, Grant. You made that choice every day for 5 months. That's not a mistake. That's not something that just happened. That's 150 deliberate decisions to betray me. She finally turned, and her eyes were dry, her voice steady. "Love doesn't look like what you did, and whatever you think you feel now that you're caught, it's not enough. It will never be enough. Leave." He left. She heard the front door open, heard it close with a gentle click that somehow felt louder than a slam would have. And then she was alone. The armor she had maintained throughout the entire confrontation held for exactly 30 seconds after the door closed. Genevieve stood perfectly still on the balcony, her hands gripping the railing, her eyes fixed on the city lights that continued their meaningless dance. Then something inside her chest cracked, a fissure so deep and sudden that it took her breath away, and the carefully constructed wall of professional composure came crashing down. Her legs gave out first. She didn't walk back into the apartment, didn't make it to the couch or the bedroom. She simply slid down the wall right there by the balcony door, her back scraping against the textured paint, until she was sitting on the cold floor with her knees pulled up to her chest. The green ceramic mug was still in her hand, the coffee now completely cold, but she couldn't seem to put it down. It was the only thing that felt real, the only solid object in a world that had suddenly become liquid and unstable. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside her, somewhere primitive and raw that she hadn't accessed since she was a teenager, crying over her father's funeral. These weren't pretty tears, weren't the kind of crying you see in movies where a single perfect drop rolls down a flawless cheek. This was ugly, violent crying. Her whole body shook with it. Her breath came in ragged gasps that hurt her chest. Her nose ran, and her throat burned, and she didn't care, couldn't care, because the pain radiating from her center was so overwhelming that physical discomfort barely registered. It wasn't just the betrayal, though that was horrific enough on its own. It was the humiliation, the shame of having been so thoroughly deceived. Every time she had kissed him goodnight over the past 5 months, every time she had made love to him, every time she had smiled at some sweet text message he sent during the day, she had been participating in her own humiliation without even knowing it. She had been the fool, the naive wife who believed her husband's lies, who never suspected that the man sharing her bed was simultaneously sharing someone else's. She thought about that weekend 3 weeks ago when he had supposedly been at a conference. She had actually felt lonely without him, had texted him sweet messages about missing him, about looking forward to him coming home. She had cleaned the apartment, made sure his favorite meal would be ready when he returned, bought new sheets for their bed because she wanted everything to be perfect for when he got back. And the entire time, he had been at some romantic bed and breakfast with another woman, probably laughing at how easy it was to deceive his trusting wife. The crying intensified, became almost hysterical for a moment. Genevieve pressed her forehead against her knees, trying to make herself as small as possible, as if she could somehow disappear into the floor and escape the unbearable weight of what she now knew. How many lies? How many times had he looked her directly in the eyes and lied? How many conversations had they had about their future, their plans, their dreams, while he was actively destroying all of it behind her back? Minutes passed, or maybe hours, Time had become meaningless. The apartment was dark now, except for the ambient light from the city filtering through the windows. At some point, her phone had started buzzing with notifications, but she ignored it. At some point, her hand finally relaxed enough that the coffee mug tilted and spilled what remained of its contents onto the floor, creating a small dark puddle that she stared at without really seeing. At some point, the violent sobs quieted into softer crying, the kind that comes from pure exhaustion rather than any real lessening of pain. Finally, when her eyes felt swollen, almost shut, and her throat was raw from crying, Genevieve pulled herself up from the floor. Her body protested every movement. She felt like she had been in a physical fight, every muscle aching, every joint stiff. She looked at the clock on the wall and was shocked to discover it was almost 1 a.m. She had been sitting on that floor for more than 4 hours. She walked to the bathroom like a person in a trance, turned on the shower without really thinking about it, and stepped under the water fully clothed. The hot water soaked through her shirt, her pants, plastered her long dark hair against her back and shoulders. She stood there, letting the water run over her, and cried some more, but softer now, quieter. The water washed away the tears, washed away the physical evidence of her breakdown, but it couldn't touch the wound that had been carved into her heart. After what felt like an eternity, she finally undressed, dropping her soaked clothes in a heap on the shower floor, and actually washed herself. The mechanical routine of shampooing her hair, soaping her body, rinsing clean felt almost meditative. When she finally turned off the water and stepped out, wrapping herself in a towel that smelled like the laundry detergent they had always used together, she felt something shift inside her. Not healing, nothing close to healing, but a kind of grim determination beginning to take root beneath the pain. She dried off, put on comfortable pajamas, and walked through the apartment, seeing it with new eyes. This was her home. She had picked out most of the furniture, had arranged it, had made this space into something beautiful and comfortable. Grant had lived here, yes, but he had never really invested in making it a home the way she had. He had been content to let her make all the decisions, to follow her lead, to simply exist in the space she created. And now he was gone, and the apartment was still hers. Genevieve made herself a cup of chamomile tea, something her mother used to make for her when she was upset as a child, and sat down at the kitchen table with her laptop. Sleep was impossible. She knew that instinctively. Her mind was racing too fast, her emotions too raw and exposed. But if she couldn't sleep, she could at least be productive with her insomnia. She opened her laptop and began researching divorce attorneys. Not tomorrow, not next week, but right now, in the darkest hours of the morning, because she needed to feel like she was doing something, taking action, moving forward instead of just drowning in grief. She read reviews, compared rates, made notes about which attorneys seemed most aggressive, most likely to ensure she walked away from this marriage with everything she deserved. Then, almost without consciously deciding to do it, she opened a new search window and typed in the name of a private investigator service she had heard about from a colleague who had gone through a messy divorce 2 years earlier. The website loaded, professional and discreet, promising thorough documentation of infidelity for legal purposes. Her finger hovered over the contact button for a long moment. Part of her brain was screaming that this was too much, that she was being vindictive, that Grant had already confessed, so what more did she need? But another part, the part that had been honed by years of financial negotiations and strategic planning, understood something crucial. If she was going to end this marriage, she needed to do it from a position of maximum strength. She needed documentation. She needed proof. She needed leverage. She clicked the button and filled out the contact form, providing basic information about her situation and requesting a consultation as soon as possible. When she hit send, it was 3:30 in the morning, and she felt something close to satisfaction for the first time since Grant had stepped onto that balcony and destroyed her world. The sky was beginning to lighten when she finally closed her laptop. She hadn't slept at all, but she had accomplished something. She had cried until there were no more tears, had let herself fall completely apart in private, and then had picked herself up and started planning her next moves. It wasn't strength, not really. It was survival instinct kicking in. The same instinct that had helped her succeed in the cutthroat world of financial consulting, where showing weakness could destroy your career. She made herself breakfast, even though she wasn't hungry, forcing down toast and scrambled eggs because her body needed fuel, even if her stomach was still twisted in knots. She showered again, properly this time, and dressed in one of her best work suits. Navy blue, tailored perfectly to her frame. The kind of outfit that made her feel professional and in control. She dried and styled her long, dark hair, applied makeup to cover the worst of the puffiness around her eyes from hours of crying, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked composed, professional, ready to face the day. No one looking at her would guess that just hours ago she had been sobbing on her bathroom floor, that her entire life had imploded, that her husband of 12 years had been living a double life for 5 months. The armor was back in place, and this time it felt less like protection and more like a weapon. Her phone buzzed again. She had been ignoring it all night, but now she picked it up and scrolled through the notifications. Several missed calls from Grant. Dozens of text messages, each one more desperate than the last. Apologizing, begging for another chance, saying he would do anything to fix this, that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. She deleted them all without responding. Words were cheap, especially from a man who had proven himself to be an accomplished liar. There was also a text from her best friend, Laura Brennan, sent late last night. "Hey, haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay? Want to grab coffee this weekend?" Laura was a literature professor at the local university, sharp and pragmatic, but also deeply caring. They had been friends since college, had supported each other through career changes and family drama, and all the normal ups and downs of life. Laura didn't know yet what had happened. Nobody did, and Genevieve wasn't ready to tell anyone. Not yet. She needed to have a plan first, needed to know what her next steps were before she opened up this wound to anyone else. She texted back a simple, "All good, just busy with work. We'll call you soon," and put her phone away. The lie felt necessary, a temporary shield while she figured out how to navigate this new reality. At exactly 7:30 in the morning, as the sun fully rose over the city, Genevieve's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. She answered, her voice steady and professional. "This is Genevieve Thornton." "Miss Thornton, this is Marcus Webb from Clearview Investigations," a deep, calm voice responded. "I received your inquiry early this morning about documentation services. I apologize for calling so early, but I wanted to reach you before business hours in case you needed to discuss this privately." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Webb. Yes, I appreciate the early call." She walked back to the balcony where this had all started, looking out at the city that was beginning to wake up, people starting their normal days completely unaware of her private catastrophe. "I need comprehensive documentation of my husband's affair. He confessed last night, but I need photographic evidence for divorce proceedings. Can you help with that?" "Absolutely," he replied. "I specialize in exactly these situations. I'll need some basic information from you, details about his routine, places he frequents, any information about the other party. The more you can tell me, the faster I can work." They spoke for 20 minutes. Genevieve provided everything she knew, the photographer's name that she had managed to find during her late-night internet search, the hotel they had been using, Grant's schedule, his vehicle information. Mr. Webb listened carefully, asked precise questions, and assured her he would have preliminary results within 48 hours. "One more thing," Genevieve said before ending the call. "The other woman is engaged. I need information about her fiancé as well. Name, contact information, anything you can find." There was a brief pause. "May I ask why?" "Because he deserves to know the truth," Genevieve said simply. "The same way I deserve to know. The same way anyone would want to know before making a life-changing commitment to someone who's been lying to them." "Understood," Mr. Webb replied, and something in his tone suggested he had handled similar situations before. Understood the complex emotions driving her decisions. "I'll include that in my research. You should hear from me by Friday morning at the latest." When she hung up, Genevieve felt something she hadn't felt since Grant's confession. She felt like she had some measure of control back. She wasn't just a victim of his choices anymore. She was taking action, making decisions, ensuring that everyone involved in this situation would face appropriate consequences. She finished getting ready for work, grabbed her briefcase and her car keys, and headed out the door. She had 3 client meetings scheduled today, and she would attend every single one of them with her usual professionalism and competence, because this was who she was. She was Genevieve Thornton, successful financial consultant, woman who had built a career through intelligence and determination. She was not going to let Grant's betrayal destroy that. He had taken her marriage, her trust, her sense of safety in her own home, but he would not take her professional reputation or her sense of self-worth. As she drove to her first appointment, she allowed herself one more moment of vulnerability, one more acknowledgement of the pain that was still there, still raw and bleeding beneath the professional armor. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she wiped it away with determination. She would cry again, she knew. There would be more nights of sobbing alone, more moments of overwhelming grief and rage. But right now, in this moment, she had to be strong. She had to function. She had to survive. The city moved around her, indifferent to her suffering. Traffic lights changed from red to green. People walked on sidewalks, drinking their morning coffee, checking their phones, living their lives. And Genevieve joined them, one more person among millions, carrying a private pain that no one around her could see. But unlike Grant, unlike his mistress, she would face the consequences of this situation with dignity and strength. She would make sure that justice was served, that truth prevailed, that no one got to walk away from this without facing what they had done. And that thought, cold and determined as winter steel, was what got her through that first impossible day. The week that followed existed in a strange duality that Genevieve had never experienced before. On the surface, to anyone watching from the outside, her life continued with almost eerie normalcy. She attended her client meetings with her usual sharp focus, analyzing portfolios and making recommendations with the same precision that had built her reputation. She responded to emails, returned phone calls, participated in conference calls with colleagues across the country. Her assistant mentioned once that she seemed a bit tired, and Genevieve attributed it to a heavy workload. A perfectly reasonable explanation that required no further discussion. But beneath that carefully maintained surface, everything was chaos. At night, alone in the apartment that felt simultaneously too large and suffocatingly small, the armor came off, and the reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. There were nights when she made dinner and automatically set 2 places at the table before remembering. Nights when she reached across the bed in her sleep, her hand searching for the warm body that had been there for 12 years, only to wake up disoriented and alone. Nights when she found herself composing text messages to Grant about something funny that had happened during her day, her fingers halfway through typing before she remembered that he no longer deserved access to her thoughts, her humor, her daily life. The anger came and went in unpredictable surges. Sometimes it hit her in the middle of a mundane task, like putting away groceries or folding laundry, and she would have to stop what she was doing and just breathe through it, her hands shaking with the force of her rage. Other times it woke her at 3 in the morning and she would lie in the darkness cataloging every lie he had told, every moment he had looked her in the eyes and deceived her, until the fury made her physically sick. Grant continued texting, calling, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate. She didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing he could say that would change what he had done. No combination of words that could undo 5 months of betrayal. She had changed the locks on the apartment 3 days after he left, hired a locksmith who asked no questions, and did efficient work. When Grant showed up that evening to collect more of his belongings, as she had told him he could, he discovered his key no longer worked and had to call her to be let in. She made him wait 15 minutes before answering, not out of cruelty, but because she was preparing herself mentally for seeing him again. When she finally opened the door, she was wearing workout clothes, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked casual, unbothered, as if his presence in her life was now nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "You changed the locks," he said, and there was something like hurt in his voice, as if he had any right to feel wounded by her actions. "It's my apartment," she replied simply. "You have 1 hour to pack whatever you need. I'll be in the bedroom with the door closed. When you're done, lock the bottom lock and slide the new key under the door. You won't need it again after today." She saw him open his mouth to argue, to plead, to try one more time to get her to engage with him beyond cold logistics. But something in her expression stopped him. He nodded once and walked past her into the apartment. Genevieve went to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the bed with her laptop, catching up on work emails with headphones on so she wouldn't have to hear him moving through their home. 53 minutes later, she heard the front door close. She waited another 5 minutes before emerging, and found the apartment subtly different. Empty spaces on bookshelves where his books had been. Missing pictures from the wall. The closet in the spare bedroom half empty where his off-season clothes had been stored. It should have made her sad, these visible signs of his removal from her life. Instead, she felt a grim satisfaction. Every item he took was one less reminder of him polluting her space. On Thursday morning, exactly 4 days after the confrontation on the balcony, Genevieve received a call from Marcus Webb. "Miss Thornton, I have preliminary results from our investigation. Are you able to meet today to review the documentation?" Her heart rate picked up, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, I can meet you during my lunch break." "Where and when?" They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop across town, far enough from her office that there was no risk of running into colleagues or clients. Genevieve arrived exactly on time, scanning the interior until she spotted a man in his 50s sitting at a corner table, a manila envelope in front of him. He stood as she approached, shook her hand with a firm, professional grip, and waited until she was seated before sitting down himself. "I'm going to be direct with you, Miss Thornton," he began, his voice low and respectful. "What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to see. If at any point you need to stop, we can take a break." She appreciated his consideration, but she also knew that she needed to see this, needed the concrete evidence to replace the terrible images her imagination had been creating. "I understand. Please, show me what you found." Marcus Webb opened the envelope and spread several 8x10 photographs on the table. Genevieve's breath caught in her throat. There was Grant, captured in crisp, undeniable detail, entering the embassy suites downtown with the woman from the photographs Genevieve had found online. Another photo showed them in the hotel bar, sitting close together, his hand on her knee under the table. Another showed them leaving together, heading toward the elevators, his arm around her waist in a gesture of casual intimacy that made Genevieve's stomach turn. "These were taken over the past 3 days," Marcus explained. "I've documented 4 separate meetings between your husband and Miss Angela Reeves. That's the photographer's name. She's 31 years old, runs a freelance photography business specializing in weddings and corporate events. And yes, she is engaged to a man named Christopher Marshall, 29, who works as a software engineer for a tech company downtown." Genevieve studied each photograph with the same analytical approach she used when reviewing financial documents for clients. She noted the time stamps, the locations, the body language. In one photo, they were kissing in the parking garage, Grant's hand tangled in the woman's hair. In another, they were laughing together over drinks, looking for all the world like a legitimate couple, rather than two people engaged in mutual betrayal. Even after your confrontation with him, even after he confessed, he's continued seeing her, Marcus said quietly. In fact, the frequency appears to have increased. 2 meetings before your confrontation last week, based on credit card records. 4 meetings in the days since. Something cold settled in Genevieve's chest. She had thought, despite everything, that Grant's confession had been genuine, that some part of him regretted what he had done, but he was still seeing her, still choosing her, still actively continuing the affair even after being caught. The betrayal somehow felt fresh all over again, a new wound layered over the one that was still bleeding. "And the fiancé?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the turmoil inside. Marcus pulled out another document, this one containing personal information, contact details, and workplace location for Christopher Marshall. He works standard business hours, Monday through Friday. Based on social media activity, he appears to have no knowledge of the affair. His posts are still celebrating the engagement, counting down to the wedding date, which is scheduled for 8 months from now. 8 months. This man had 8 months until he was supposed to marry a woman who was actively cheating on him. 8 months during which he could make wedding plans, put deposits on venues, send out invitations, all while being completely oblivious to the fact that his fiancée was betraying him in exactly the same way Grant had betrayed Genevieve. She sat back in her chair, processing all of this information. The photographs spread across the table were like evidence at a crime scene, documenting the systematic destruction of trust, of vows, of the basic human decency that should exist between people who claim to love each other. And suddenly, Genevieve knew exactly what she needed to do. "I want to meet him," she said. "Christopher Marshall. I want to meet him and show him these photographs." Marcus Webb studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure about that? Once you open that door, there's no closing it. You'll be responsible for destroying his relationship, his future plans, his trust in the woman he loves. That's a heavy burden to carry. Heavier than letting him marry someone who's lying to him?" Genevieve countered. "Heavier than watching him make vows to a woman who's incapable of honoring them? If I were in his position, I would want to know. I would want someone to have the courage to tell me the truth before I made an irreversible mistake." She paused, then added more softly, "I wish someone had told me before I spent 12 years with a man who was capable of this." The investigator nodded slowly. "Then I'll help you arrange a meeting. But I recommend you do it in a public place, somewhere neutral. He's going to be devastated, possibly angry. You want to be safe." They spent the next 20 minutes planning the approach. Marcus would reach out to Christopher under the guise of needing to speak with him about a matter concerning Angela Reeves, something that required an in-person meeting. They would suggest a coffee shop, neutral territory, during a weekday afternoon. Genevieve would be there, would explain who she was and why she was there, and would present the evidence. After that, what Christopher Marshall chose to do with the information would be entirely up to him. "There's one more thing you should know," Marcus said, as Genevieve prepared to leave. "Your husband has been looking for you. He's been asking mutual friends where you are, when you'll be willing to talk to him again. He seems to believe that with enough time and enough apologies, you'll forgive him and take him back." Genevieve felt a flash of something that might have been pity, but it was quickly overtaken by cold determination. "Then he doesn't know me at all. He never did." She stood, gathered the photographs and documents into the envelope, and extended her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Webb, for your efficiency and your discretion. Please let me know as soon as you've arranged the meeting with Christopher Marshall." She left the coffee shop and sat in her car for several minutes, the envelope heavy on her lap. The photographs inside represented more than just documentation of an affair. They represented the absolute death of any possibility of reconciliation. the final confirmation that Grant was not the man she had believed him to be, that perhaps he had never been that man. She had given him a chance to end it, to at least show some genuine remorse by cutting off contact with his mistress. Instead, he had doubled down, had chosen to continue the affair even more intensely. That night, Genevieve did something she hadn't done in the 4 days since the confrontation. She called Laura Brennan. Her best friend answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Jen, finally! I was starting to think you were avoiding me. What's going on?" Genevieve opened her mouth to deliver the casual, everything is fine response she had been planning, but what came out instead was, "Grant cheated on me for 5 months, and I don't know how to—" Her voice cracked, betraying the emotion she had been holding back. "I don't know how to do this, Laura." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Then Laura's voice, suddenly serious and focused. "I'm coming over. Right now. Don't argue with me. I'll be there in 20 minutes. True to her word, Laura arrived 23 minutes later with a bag of Chinese takeout, a bottle of wine, and a fierce determination in her eyes. Genevieve let her in, and the moment the door closed, she found herself being pulled into a tight hug that finally broke through the last of her defenses. She cried on her best friend's shoulder, the kind of helpless, exhausted crying that comes after holding yourself together for too long. Laura didn't ask questions right away. She just held her friend, rubbed her back, and made soothing sounds until the crying subsided. Then she guided Genevieve to the couch, opened the wine, served the food that Genevieve couldn't possibly eat, but appreciated anyway, and said simply, "Tell me everything." So Genevieve did. She told her about the confession on the balcony, about the 5 months of lies, about the phone call with the mistress, and the devastating revelation that Grant had destroyed his marriage for someone who had never taken him seriously. She told her about hiring the private investigator, about the photographs that confirmed he was still seeing her, about her plan to meet with the mistress's fiancé and reveal the truth. Laura listened to it all without interrupting, her face cycling through shock, anger, and fierce protective loyalty. When Genevieve finished, Laura was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she said, "I know this probably isn't what you want to hear right now, but I need you to listen to me carefully. You are doing everything right. You are handling this with more grace and strength than most people could manage. But you also need to let yourself fall apart sometimes. You need to stop being so strong every single second. If I fall apart, I won't be able to function," Genevieve said quietly. "I have clients depending on me, deadlines to meet, a life to maintain, and you also have a shattered heart that needs time to heal." Laura interrupted gently. "Jen, you can't just power through this like it's a difficult project at work. This is grief. This is trauma. And you need to give yourself permission to feel it fully, not just in controlled moments when you're alone at 3 in the morning. Genevieve looked at her best friend and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "I'm afraid if I really let myself feel it, I'll never stop crying. I'll just drown in it." "You won't," Laura promised. "You'll cry, and you'll rage, and you'll feel like the world is ending, and then gradually, slowly, you'll start to heal. But you can't skip the feeling part. Trust me on this." She poured more wine into both their glasses. "Also, for what it's worth, I think you should tell Christopher Marshall. He deserves to know, just like you deserve to know. But after you do that, I want you to think about something." "What?" "I want you to think about talking to a therapist," Laura said carefully. "A professional who can help you process all of this in a healthy way. Because what Grant did to you isn't just about the affair. It's about betrayal, about broken trust, about having to rebuild your entire understanding of your marriage and your life. That's heavy stuff, Jen. Too heavy to carry alone." Genevieve's first instinct was to reject the suggestion. She had always prided herself on her independence, on her ability to handle her own problems without needing outside help. But as she sat there on her couch with her best friend, surrounded by evidence of her husband's betrayal and the wreckage of her marriage, she realized that maybe this was too big to handle alone. Maybe asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. "Okay," she said finally. "After I meet with Christopher Marshall, after I've done what needs to be done, I'll look into finding a therapist." Laura squeezed her hand. "Good. And in the meantime, I want you to know that I'm here, anytime, day or night. If you need to cry or scream or just sit in silence with someone who loves you, I'm here." They spent the rest of the evening talking about everything and nothing, and for the first time since that night on the balcony, Genevieve felt something that wasn't just pain or anger or determination. She felt gratitude. Gratitude for a friend who showed up without being asked, who listened without judging, who offered support without trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. It didn't make the situation better, didn't heal the wound Grant had carved into her heart, but it made it slightly more bearable. And sometimes, in the darkest moments, bearable was enough. 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon that felt both ordinary and momentous, Genevieve found herself sitting in a different coffee shop, this one bright and busy with the lunch crowd, waiting for a man whose life she was about to destroy. She had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a soft gray sweater and dark slacks, professional but approachable, wanting to look like someone trustworthy rather than threatening. The manila envelope sat on the table in front of her, innocent-looking despite the devastation contained within. Marcus Webb had called the previous evening to confirm that Christopher Marshall had agreed to the meeting. He had been told only that it concerned Angela Reeves and that the matter was urgent and personal. Genevieve had spent most of the night rehearsing what she would say, how she would present the information, trying to find words that would be honest but kind, direct but compassionate. There was no good way to tell someone that their entire future was built on lies, but there had to be a better way than the brutal shock she herself had experienced. At exactly 1:15, a young man walked through the coffee shop door, looking around with visible confusion and concern. He matched the photographs Marcus had shown her, tall and lean with sandy brown hair and glasses that gave him a slightly bookish appearance. He was wearing business casual clothes, a button-down shirt and khakis, and he carried himself with the slight awkwardness of someone who spent most of his time behind a computer screen. When his eyes found Genevieve sitting alone at the corner table, he approached hesitantly. "Are you the person I'm supposed to meet?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I'm Christopher Marshall. I was told someone needed to speak with me about Angela." Genevieve stood and extended her hand, which he shook automatically. "Yes. Thank you for coming, Mr. Marshall. Please, sit down. Can I get you a coffee? Something to eat?" He shook his head, settling into the chair across from her with obvious nervousness. "I'm fine, thank you. I have to admit, I'm pretty confused about what this is about. The man who called said it was urgent, but he wouldn't give me any details. Is Angela okay? Did something happen to her?" The genuine concern in his voice made Genevieve's heart clench. This was a man who loved his fiancée, who was worried about her well-being, who had no idea that the woman he was planning to marry was betraying him. She took a deep breath, reminding herself why she was doing this, and began. "Angela is fine, physically. Nothing has happened to her in that sense. But I need to tell you something that's going to be very difficult to hear. And I want you to know that I'm not doing this to be cruel or vindictive. I'm doing this because if I were in your position, I would want someone to tell me the truth." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "My name is Genevieve Thornton. I'm here because my husband has been having an affair with your fiancé for the past 5 months. Christopher's face went through a rapid series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, the beginning of anger, before settling on something like shock. No, that's not possible. Angela wouldn't. We're getting married. We've been planning the wedding. She wouldn't do that. I thought the same thing about my husband," Genevieve said gently. "For 12 years, I trusted him completely. I never suspected, never questioned. And then 8 days ago, he confessed. He told me everything. About meeting her at a corporate event he was coordinating in February, about their regular meetings at the Embassy Suites downtown, about lying to me for 5 months straight. She slid the envelope across the table. I hired a private investigator to document the affair. What's in this envelope is going to be painful to see, but it's the truth. And I believe you deserve to know the truth before you make a permanent commitment to someone who's been lying to you. Christopher stared at the envelope as if it were a snake, his hands remaining flat on the table, not reaching for it. This could be fake. You could be making this up. Maybe you're just some crazy person trying to ruin my relationship because you're unhappy in yours. I could be, Genevieve acknowledged, but I'm not. Open the envelope, Mr. Marshall. Look at the evidence, and then you can decide for yourself what you believe and what you want to do with this information. His hand trembled slightly as he finally reached for the envelope. He opened it slowly, as if hoping that taking his time would somehow change what was inside. The first photograph showed Grant and Angela entering the hotel together, and Christopher's face drained of color. He shuffled through the rest with increasing speed, each image clearly showing his fiancée with another man, holding hands, kissing, exhibiting the kind of intimate body language that left no room for innocent interpretation. When he reached the last photograph, he set them all down on the table and stared at them in silence. Genevieve watched emotions play across his face, saw the moment when denial gave way to acceptance, when shock transformed into pain. His jaw clenched, his hands formed fists on the table, and when he finally looked up at her, there were tears in his eyes that he was clearly trying very hard not to let fall. "How long did you say this has been going on?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. 5 months, Genevieve replied. "Since early February, based on what my husband told me and what the investigator has confirmed." "February," Christopher repeated, and something in his voice suggested the timing held significance. "We got engaged in January. We'd been dating for 3 years, and I finally proposed and she said yes. She seemed so happy. We started planning the wedding immediately. She picked out her dress in February. He stopped, his voice breaking. She was picking out her wedding dress while she was starting an affair with your husband." The devastation in his words mirrored exactly what Genevieve had felt when she realized Grant had been lying to her while they planned their vacation, while they discussed their future, while they lived what she had thought was a normal, loving marriage. "I'm so sorry," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I know exactly how you feel right now. The betrayal, the humiliation, the way your entire understanding of your relationship suddenly feels like it was built on lies." "Does she know you're here?" Christopher asked suddenly. "Does she know you're telling me this?" "No. I spoke with her once, on the phone, the night my husband confessed. I wanted to hear it from her directly, wanted to understand what had been happening. She admitted to the affair but claimed it didn't mean anything, that she never intended to leave you, that my husband was just—" Genevieve paused, remembering the painful conversation. "She said he was just a distraction from the pressure of wedding planning, that it was never serious for her." Christopher let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. "A distraction. From marrying me. From building a life with me. That was so stressful that she needed to sleep with someone else's husband." He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, taking several deep breaths. When he lowered his hands, his expression had hardened slightly. "Why are you telling me this? What do you get out of it?" It was a fair question, one Genevieve had asked herself many times over the past week. "Honestly, nothing. I don't get anything out of this except the knowledge that I did what I would have wanted someone to do for me. If there had been someone who knew about my husband's affair, someone who could have told me before I wasted another day of my life trusting him, I would have been grateful. Not in the moment, maybe. In the moment, I would have been devastated, just like you are now. But eventually, I would have been grateful that someone cared enough to tell me the truth." Christopher gathered the photographs back into the envelope with movements that were mechanical, almost robotic, as if his body was functioning on autopilot while his mind tried to process the impossible. "What are you going to do? About your husband, I mean." "I'm divorcing him," Genevieve said simply. "I've already contacted an attorney. We had a prenuptial agreement that will protect most of my assets, and I'm making sure that he faces appropriate consequences for his choices. What you do with this information is entirely up to you, Mr. Marshall. But I will say this. Someone who's capable of betraying you while planning a wedding, while making vows and promises about your future together, someone who's capable of that level of deception will do it again. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the same way, but the capacity for that kind of betrayal doesn't just disappear." He nodded slowly, still staring at the envelope. "I need to think. I don't even know what I need." He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made several nearby customers glance over. "Thank you for telling me. I think. I don't know if I'm grateful right now, but maybe I will be eventually." "I understand," Genevieve said, standing as well. She pulled a business card from her purse and placed it on the table. "If you need to talk, if you have questions, if you just need to speak with someone who understands what you're going through, you can call me. There's no pressure, no expectation, just an offer." Christopher picked up the card, looked at it for a moment, then tucked it into his pocket along with the envelope. He started to leave, then turned back. "The man who called me, the investigator, he mentioned that your husband is still seeing her, even after confessing to you. Is that true?" "Yes," Genevieve confirmed. "The photographs were taken over the past week. He's seen her 4 times since he confessed to me. So whatever he claimed about being sorry or wanting to fix our marriage, his actions tell a different story." Something shifted in Christopher's expression, the pain giving way momentarily to anger. "Then he's an idiot, and so is she." He nodded once more, then walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. Genevieve sat back down, her legs suddenly weak. She had done it. She had told him the truth, had shown him the evidence, had given him the information he needed to make an informed decision about his future. And now she felt empty. Not triumphant, not satisfied, just hollow. Because destroying someone else's illusions, even for good reasons, even to protect them from greater harm, left a stain that she could feel settling over her. She sat in that coffee shop for another 30 minutes, drinking cold coffee and watching people come and go, living their normal lives. Somewhere out in the city, Christopher Marshall was processing the information she had given him, was probably confronting Angela, was watching his own future crumble the way hers had. And somewhere else, Grant was going about his day, completely unaware that the consequences of his actions were finally catching up to him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Her phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "How did it go?" Genevieve typed back, "I told him everything. Showed him the photos. He was devastated but deserved to know." "You did the right thing," Laura responded immediately. "Are you okay?" Was she okay? Genevieve considered the question. "No, but I will be." She left the coffee shop and drove back to her office, where she spent the afternoon immersed in work, letting the familiar routines of financial analysis and client consultations distract her from the emotional weight of what she had just done. But that evening, alone in her apartment once again, the reality of the situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. 2 days later, on Thursday evening, Genevieve received a phone call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "This is Genevieve Thornton." "Miss Thornton, this is Christopher Marshall. We met earlier this week." His voice was calmer than it had been in the coffee shop, but there was a weariness to it that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult conversations. "Mr. Marshall, how are you?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honestly, I've been better, but I wanted to call and tell you what happened, since you were the one who made it possible for me to see the truth." He paused, and Genevieve could hear him take a deep breath. "I confronted Angela that same afternoon, showed her the photographs, asked her to explain. She tried to deny it at first, said the pictures were taken out of context, that your investigator had somehow staged things. But then I told her about you, about your husband's confession, about the 5 months of lies, and she finally admitted it. "I'm sorry," Genevieve said softly. "Don't be. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." There was another pause. She tried to minimize it, said it was just a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that she loved me and wanted to marry me. She actually had the nerve to ask if we could go to couples counseling, if we could work through this, as if working through 5 months of deliberate betrayal was even possible. "What did you do?" I told her the engagement was over, that I couldn't marry someone who was capable of lying to my face for 5 months while planning our wedding. She cried, begged, promised it would never happen again, but I held firm. And then I told her that I hoped it was worth it, throwing away 3 years of a real relationship for whatever she had with your husband. His voice hardened slightly. She tried to call me yesterday, sent probably 20 text messages. I blocked her number. "I'm done." "That took a lot of strength," Genevieve said, meaning it. "I know how hard it is to walk away even when you know you should." "Miss Thornton, I called to thank you," Christopher continued, "not just for telling me, but for having the courage to show up and do something that must have been incredibly difficult. You could have just focused on your own situation, on your own divorce, and left me to figure it out on my own. But you didn't. You made sure I knew the truth before it was too late." That means something. After they hung up, Genevieve sat on her couch feeling something she hadn't felt in the 10 days since Grant's confession. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of rightness, of having done something meaningful despite the pain it caused. Christopher Marshall would heal, would eventually move on and find someone worthy of his trust and love. And he would do so without having wasted years of his life married to someone who had proven herself unworthy of that commitment. The next morning, Genevieve made 2 phone calls. The first was to her divorce attorney, confirming that she wanted to move forward with filing immediately. The second was to a therapist whose name Laura had given her, requesting an initial consultation. Both conversations were brief, professional, and felt like necessary steps forward. That afternoon, she received a series of increasingly frantic text messages from Grant. "What did you do?" "Angela's fiancé called me, confronted me, said you showed him pictures. Why would you do that? This is between us, Jen. You had no right to involve other people." She stared at the messages for a long moment, then typed a single response. "You involved other people when you started an affair. You involved me in your lies for 5 months. You involved Angela in destroying our marriage. And her fiancé deserved to know the truth before making an irreversible commitment. Don't contact me again unless it's through my attorney." She blocked his number immediately after sending the message. Whatever else he wanted to say, whatever justifications or explanations or accusations he wanted to throw at her, she was done listening. That chapter of her life was closed, and she was ready to begin the difficult work of moving forward. That night, Genevieve kept her promise to Laura and to herself. She sat down with her laptop and began researching therapists, reading reviews and credentials, looking for someone who specialized in betrayal trauma and divorce recovery. It felt strange, admitting that she needed help, that this was too big to handle alone. But it also felt like a relief, like permission to stop pretending she was okay when she wasn't. She scheduled her first therapy appointment for the following Tuesday afternoon. When she closed her laptop that night, she felt something that had been absent for the past 2 weeks. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of hope. The understanding that while right now everything felt broken and painful and impossible, there might come a day when it felt different, when the weight would be lighter, when breathing wouldn't require quite so much effort. And for now, that possibility was enough to keep moving forward. The first therapy session was harder than Genevieve had anticipated. She had walked into Dr. Krista Booker's office on that Tuesday afternoon with her armor fully in place, prepared to discuss her situation with the same professional detachment she used in business meetings. But Dr. Booker, a woman in her early 50s with warm brown eyes and an unexpectedly direct manner, had seen through that armor within the first 10 minutes. "You're doing that thing," Dr. Booker said gently, interrupting Genevieve's carefully composed explanation of the situation. "What thing?" Genevieve asked, immediately defensive. "That thing where you narrate your own trauma like you're giving a presentation to a board of directors. Calm, collected, just the facts. No emotion, no vulnerability, no acknowledgement that this absolutely devastated you." Dr. Booker leaned forward slightly. "Genevieve, you don't have to be strong in this room. In fact, I'd prefer if you weren't. Strength has its place, but healing requires something different. It requires honesty, even when that honesty is messy and painful." Something in Genevieve's chest cracked at those words. "If I'm not strong, I'll fall apart," she whispered, and was horrified to hear her voice break. "Then fall apart," Dr. Booker said simply. "Fall apart here, where it's safe, where there's no one to impress or protect or perform for. Let yourself feel what you've been working so hard not to feel." And Genevieve did. She cried in that therapist's office, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to cry even in private. She cried about the betrayal, about the humiliation, about the loss of the future she had imagined. She cried about the version of herself that had died the night Grant confessed, the woman who had believed that trust was enough, that love was enough, that honesty was the foundation of their marriage. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, more suspicious, more aware of how easily the people you love can destroy you. "I don't know who I am anymore," Genevieve said when the crying finally subsided, her voice raw. "Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, about him, it was all a lie. And if I was wrong about all of that, how do I trust my own judgment about anything?" Dr. Booker handed her another tissue. "That's one of the cruelest aspects of betrayal. It doesn't just damage your ability to trust others. It damages your ability to trust yourself, your own perceptions, your own instincts. But Genevieve, you weren't wrong about your marriage. Your marriage was exactly what you thought it was until the moment Grant chose to betray it. His choices don't reflect on your judgment. They reflect on his character." "But I should have seen it," Genevieve insisted. "There must have been signs, things I missed because I was too trusting or too naive or too—" "Stop," Dr. Booker interrupted firmly. "This is what I want you to understand. You're not responsible for noticing that someone you loved and trusted was lying to you. The only person responsible for the betrayal is the person who committed it. Grant made 150 conscious decisions to deceive you. That's on him, not you." Over the following weeks, Genevieve found herself returning to that office every Tuesday afternoon, and slowly, gradually, something began to shift. The sessions weren't easy. Dr. Booker pushed her to examine not just the betrayal itself, but her responses to it, her patterns of thinking, her tendency to intellectualize emotions rather than feeling them. But with that pushing came understanding, came perspective, came the beginning of something that might eventually become healing. 3 weeks into therapy, during a particularly difficult session, Dr. Booker asked a question that changed everything. "Genevieve, are you grieving your marriage, or are you grieving the illusion of your marriage?" Genevieve stared at her, the question hitting like a physical blow. "What's the difference? Your marriage, the actual relationship you had with Grant, existed for 12 years. It had good moments and bad moments, strengths and weaknesses, like any long-term relationship. But the marriage you thought you had, the one built on complete honesty and mutual faithfulness, that marriage only existed in your mind. Grant's version of the marriage included lies and betrayal from the beginning of the affair. So which one are you mourning?" The question haunted Genevieve for days. She realized that she wasn't mourning the relationship she had actually been living in for the past 5 months, where Grant came home from his mistress and lied to her face. She was mourning the relationship she had believed she was in, the safe, honest partnership that had never actually existed once the affair began. And recognizing that distinction somehow made the grief more manageable, more finite. She wasn't losing something real. She was letting go of an illusion. But there were still bad days. Days when getting out of bed felt impossible, when the weight of everything that had happened pressed down so heavily that breathing took conscious effort. There was a Thursday morning, about 6 weeks after the initial confrontation, when Genevieve simply couldn't do it. She called her office, told her assistant she was sick, which was technically true in the way that grief is a sickness that affects the whole body, and spent the entire day in her pajamas watching mindless television and eating ice cream directly from the container. Laura showed up that evening, letting herself in with the spare key Genevieve had given her, and found her friend still on the couch, surrounded by tissues and empty ice cream containers. She didn't lecture or try to force Genevieve to snap out of it. She just sat down, put Genevieve's head in her lap, and stroked her hair while they watched terrible reality shows together until Genevieve finally fell asleep. The next morning, Genevieve woke up feeling slightly better. Not good, not even close to good, but better. She showered, dressed in real clothes, and went to work. Because that was how healing worked. She was learning, not in a straight line, not in predictable stages, but in waves. Good days and bad days, forward progress and setbacks, moments of strength and moments of complete collapse. All of it was normal. All of it was part of the process. The divorce proceedings moved forward with a efficiency that was both satisfying and somehow anticlimactic. The prenuptial agreement she had insisted on years ago, much to Grant's initial offense, proved invaluable. The apartment remained hers. The investment accounts remained mostly hers. He kept his business assets and his vehicle, and walked away with enough to start over but not enough to avoid consequences. The judge reviewed the evidence of the affair, including the photographs from the private investigator, and was unsympathetic to Grant's attempts to argue for a more equitable division of assets. Through mutual acquaintances and the inevitable small-town nature of their professional circles, Genevieve heard snippets about the fallout from the exposed affair. Angela Reeves had indeed lost several wedding photography contracts, though not as many as initial rumors suggested. Most people, it turned out, were able to separate personal behavior from professional competence. Grant had lost a few corporate clients, particularly those with strong family values written into their company missions. But his career wasn't destroyed. He moved into a smaller apartment across town, continued coordinating events on a freelance basis, and from what Genevieve could gather, was no longer seeing Angela. The affair, apparently, hadn't survived being exposed. Without the excitement of secrecy and forbidden attraction, whatever had existed between them had simply evaporated. Genevieve felt nothing when she learned this. No satisfaction, no vindication, just a sort of weary acknowledgement that most affairs didn't survive the harsh light of reality. They had destroyed 2 relationships, hurt multiple people, and upended several lives for something that couldn't even last once it was brought into the open. There was one session with Dr. Booker, about 8 weeks into therapy, that tested Genevieve's commitment to the process. They had been discussing forgiveness, and Dr. Booker had suggested that eventually Genevieve might want to consider forgiving Grant, not for his sake, but for her own peace. "No," Genevieve said flatly. "I'm never going to forgive him. What he did was unforgivable. Forgiveness doesn't mean what he did was okay," Dr. Booker explained patiently. "It doesn't mean you're excusing it or minimizing it. It just means you're releasing the anger and resentment so it doesn't poison your own life going forward." "I don't want to forgive him," Genevieve insisted, feeling her defenses rising. "The anger is useful. It keeps me focused, keeps me from being weak, keeps me from making the mistake of taking him back if he ever asks." Dr. Booker was quiet for a long moment. "Genevieve, do you think Grant is going to ask you to take him back?" I don't know. Maybe. Eventually. And if he did, do you need anger to tell you the answer should be no? Or is the answer no simply because you've recognized that he's not the person you thought he was, that what he did revealed fundamental character flaws that make him unsuitable as a partner? Genevieve opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. The truth was, she didn't need anger to know she would never take Grant back. She knew it with absolute clarity. Anger or no anger. The relationship was over not because she was too hurt or too angry to forgive, but because trust, once broken this thoroughly, couldn't be rebuilt. Because someone who could lie so consistently and so well for 5 months wasn't someone she could ever feel safe with again. I'm not ready to forgive him, she said finally. Maybe I never will be, but I can work on letting go of the anger. Not for him, for myself. That session left her shaken and uncertain, questioning whether she even wanted to continue therapy if it was going to push her toward forgiveness she didn't feel ready for. She almost canceled her next appointment. She had her phone in her hand, the therapist's number pulled up, her finger hovering over the call button. And then Laura's words from weeks ago echoed in her mind. You need to give yourself permission to feel it fully. Quitting therapy because it was uncomfortable, because it challenged her, would be just another way of avoiding the difficult work of healing. She put the phone down and kept the appointment. 4 months after that devastating night on the balcony, Genevieve attended a professional networking event for financial consultants and auditors. She went reluctantly, still not feeling entirely social, but understanding that maintaining her professional relationships was important for her career. She was standing near the refreshments table, making polite conversation with a colleague, when a man approached and introduced himself. Nathan Rivera, he said, extending his hand. I'm an auditor with Morrison and Associates. I don't think we've met before. He was in his mid-40s, with kind eyes and an easy smile that didn't try too hard. They talked about work for a while, discovered they had several professional acquaintances in common, and found themselves genuinely enjoying the conversation. When he asked for her business card at the end of the evening, she gave it to him without overthinking it. 2 weeks later, he called and asked if she wanted to meet for coffee, to discuss a potential professional collaboration on a client's account. The meeting was professional and productive, but there was also something else there, something Genevieve recognized as interest, even though neither of them acknowledged it directly. When they finished discussing business, Nathan hesitated, then asked, "Would you be interested in having dinner sometime? Not for work, just dinner." Genevieve's first instinct was to say no. She wasn't ready. She was still healing. She couldn't possibly consider starting something new when she was still so broken from what had ended. But then she thought about what Dr. Booker had said in their last session. Healing isn't about waiting until you're perfect before you try again. It's about moving forward even when you're still carrying scars. I'd like that, she heard herself say. But I need to be honest with you about something first. I'm recently divorced. Very recently. And it ended badly. I'm not looking for anything serious right now, and I'm not sure I'm ready for dating at all. So, if you're looking for something that moves quickly, I'm probably not the right person. Nathan nodded slowly. I appreciate the honesty. For what it's worth, I'm divorced too. It's been 2 years, and I'm still figuring things out. I have a teenage daughter who's my priority, and I'm not interested in rushing into anything either. Maybe we could just see what happens? No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people who've both been through difficult situations, having dinner and getting to know each other. They had dinner the following Friday at a small Italian restaurant that was quiet enough for conversation. It was good, not magical, not love at first sight, not the beginning of some epic romance. Just good. They talked about their careers, about their interests, about safe topics that didn't require too much vulnerability. At the end of the evening, Nathan walked her to her car and said goodnight with a simple handshake, respecting the boundaries she had set. Their second date, 2 weeks later, was slightly less guarded. He told her about his divorce, about his ex-wife's affair, about the pain of rebuilding his life while co-parenting a daughter who had been devastated by her parents' split. Genevieve found herself sharing parts of her own story. Not all of it, not the most painful details, but enough that he understood she was still healing. "Some days are harder than others," she admitted over dessert. "Some days I wake up and I'm okay. And other days, the grief hits me out of nowhere and I can barely function. It's not linear, it's messy and unpredictable. And I'm not sure when or if it will ever feel completely resolved. That's normal," Nathan said gently. 2 years out, and I still have days like that. It gets better, but it doesn't disappear completely. You just learn to carry it differently. Their third date was the one where they kissed. A gentle, tentative kiss goodnight that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Genevieve drove home with her heart racing, part of her excited and part of her panicking. She called Laura as soon as she got home. "I kissed someone," she blurted out as soon as Laura answered. "We kissed, and it was nice. And now I'm freaking out because what if I'm not ready? What if I'm just using him to avoid dealing with my feelings about Grant? What if I'm making a huge mistake?" Laura laughed, warm and reassuring. "Jen, breathe. You're allowed to kiss someone. You're allowed to enjoy it. You're allowed to explore the possibility of connection with someone new without it meaning you're healed or not healed or using anyone. You're just living your life. That's allowed." The relationship with Nathan developed slowly over the following months. There were good dates and awkward dates. There were moments when Genevieve felt herself pulling back, getting scared, retreating into the safety of emotional distance. There were conversations where she had to explain that she wasn't ready for certain steps, certain levels of commitment, and Nathan was patient each time, never pushing, always respecting her boundaries. He had his own baggage, his own moments of withdrawal, his own healing to do. They were both works in progress, and somehow that made it easier. 7 months after that night on the balcony, exactly 1 month after the divorce was finalized, Genevieve was leaving her office building at the end of a long day when she saw Grant in the parking lot. He was leaning against his car, clearly waiting for her, and her heart lurched at the sight of him. He looked different, thinner, older somehow, with deeper lines around his eyes and a weariness to his posture that hadn't been there before. "Jen," he said as she approached, and his voice was tentative, uncertain. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I was hoping we could talk, just for a few minutes." Every instinct told her to walk past him, to get in her car, and drive away without engaging. But something, maybe curiosity, maybe a need for closure, made her stop. 5 minutes, she said. "That's all." They stood in the parking lot, an awkward distance between them, and Grant struggled visibly to find the right words. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. I know I said it before, many times, but I don't think I really understood what I was apologizing for until recently. I destroyed something good, something real, for something that was never going to last. I threw away 12 years for 5 months of lies, and I will regret that for the rest of my life." Genevieve listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "I appreciate the apology, Grant. I do, and I believe you're sorry, that you have regrets. But sorry doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't give me back the months I spent being deceived. It doesn't restore the trust that's gone forever." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I know that's not possible. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost. You deserved better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty and faithfulness, and I failed you completely." She studied him, this man who had been her husband for 12 years, and felt a strange mix of emotions. Pity, because he genuinely seemed to understand the magnitude of his mistakes. Sadness, for the relationship that had been good once and was now irrevocably broken. But also, surprisingly, a kind of peace. because looking at him didn't hurt the way it once had. The sight of him didn't tear open wounds that were still raw and bleeding. The wounds were there, yes, but they had begun to heal, had begun to form scars that were part of her now, but didn't define her anymore. "I hope you learn from this," she said finally. "I hope you become someone who's capable of honesty, of loyalty, of treating the next person in your life with the respect I deserved. And I hope you find some peace with what you've done, because carrying that kind of guilt forever helps no one." "What about you?" he asked. Are you doing okay?" "I'm doing better," she said honestly. "Some days are still hard. I'm in therapy. I'm rebuilding my life. I'm learning to trust again, slowly. I'm seeing someone, actually. Someone who's patient with my baggage, who understands that healing isn't linear, who doesn't expect me to be perfect or completely over what happened." She paused, then added, "I'm learning that it's okay to be a work in progress, that you don't have to wait until you're completely healed to start living again." Something flickered across Grant's face, jealousy or regret, or maybe just acknowledgement of the finality of their separation. "I'm glad you're finding happiness. You deserve that. You deserved it all along. Take care of yourself, Grant," Genevieve said, and it wasn't cruel or bitter. It was simply a goodbye, a final closing of a chapter that had already ended. She got in her car and drove away without looking back. That evening, after a quiet dinner at Nathan's apartment, where she met his teenage daughter for the first time, a meeting that was nerve-wracking but went surprisingly well, Genevieve told him she needed to go home alone. He understood without her having to explain, kissed her gently, and let her go without question. She drove home through the evening city, the lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over everything. When she got to her apartment, she walked directly to the balcony, the place where everything had changed 7 months ago, and prepared a fresh cup of coffee in her green ceramic mug. She settled into the same chair, looked out at the same view, and allowed herself to really feel the weight of the journey she had been on. 7 months ago, she had stood in this exact spot and watched her entire world crumble. 7 months ago, she had believed that the pain would never end, that she would never feel whole again, that the betrayal would define the rest of her life. And for a while, it had felt that way. The nights she had spent sobbing on the bathroom floor, the mornings she couldn't get out of bed, the moments of rage that had consumed her so completely, she thought she might drown in it. The humiliation of knowing she had been deceived so thoroughly, the fear that she would never trust anyone again, including herself. But here she was, still standing, still breathing, still capable of laughing with friends, of doing her job well, of opening herself up to the possibility of new connection, even though it terrified her. The woman who had existed before Grant's confession was gone. Yes, but the woman who had emerged from the wreckage of that betrayal was stronger in ways that mattered more. Not the performative strength she had tried to maintain in those early days, the armor that kept everyone at a distance, but real strength, the kind that came from facing her darkest moments and surviving them, from letting herself fall apart completely and then choosing, day after day, to put the pieces back together. The scars were still there. She knew they always would be. There was a part of her that would always be wary, always be slightly suspicious, always carry the knowledge that people you love can betray you in ways that seem impossible until they happen. But those scars didn't make her weaker. They made her more careful, yes, more aware, more conscious of protecting herself. But they also made her more compassionate, more understanding of the complexity of human pain, more willing to extend grace to others who were struggling through their own impossible situations. She thought about Christopher Marshall, hoped he was finding his way through his own healing journey. She thought about Dr. Krista Booker, whose insistent pushing had helped her face truths she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. She thought about Laura, who had shown up without being asked and had held her through the worst of it. She thought about Nathan, who was patient with her broken places and didn't expect her to be anything other than exactly who she was right now. And she thought about Grant, standing in that parking lot earlier, genuinely sorry, but unable to undo any of what he had done. She had meant it when she said she hoped he learned from this, that he became someone better, not because she cared about him anymore in any romantic sense, but because the world needed fewer people who hurt others carelessly, and more people who understood the weight of their choices. The coffee had grown cool in her hands, just like it had that first night. But this time, the cooling didn't represent a world ending. It represented time passing, represented sitting with her thoughts long enough to process them, represented the peace that came from acceptance rather than resistance. Genevieve allowed herself to cry then, but these tears were different from all the others she had shed over the past 7 months. These weren't tears of devastation or rage or betrayal. These were tears of release, of letting go, of acknowledging both the pain of what had been lost and the possibility of what might still be found. She cried for the woman she had been, naive and trusting, and believing that love was enough. She cried for the marriage that had been good once, before Grant made his choices. She cried for the time that had been wasted, the trust that had been broken, the innocence that could never be recovered. But she also cried with something that felt almost like gratitude. Gratitude that she had discovered the truth before wasting more years. Gratitude for the friends who had supported her without judgment. Gratitude for the strength she had discovered in herself, the resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Gratitude for the therapy that had helped her process what had happened in healthy ways. Gratitude for the possibility of new love, imperfect and uncertain, but real. When the tears stopped, Genevieve took a deep breath and felt something shift in her chest. The weight that had been crushing her for 7 months was still there, but it was lighter now, more manageable, more like something she could carry without it destroying her. She wasn't completely healed. She probably never would be completely healed, because some wounds leave permanent marks. But she was healing, and that was enough. She stood up, walked to the railing of the balcony, and looked out at the city stretching before her. Millions of lights, millions of lives, millions of people carrying their own joys and sorrows and triumphs and defeats. She was just one among them. One person with one story, navigating the complexity of being human in a world that could be both beautiful and brutal. Genevieve raised her mug in a quiet toast. To truth, no matter how painful. To the courage to walk away when staying would destroy you. To therapy and friends and the messy, non-linear process of healing. To new beginnings that come with no guarantees but deserve to be tried anyway. To the capacity of the human heart to break completely and still, somehow, keep beating. And most of all, to herself. Not for being perfect or strong every single moment, but for surviving. For falling apart when she needed to and pulling herself back together when she could. For asking for help. For taking action. For refusing to let Grant's betrayal define the rest of her life. The city lights continued their indifferent dance, caring nothing for human dramas. And that was okay. The world would keep turning whether she healed or not, whether she found happiness again or not, whether she ever fully trusted someone again or not. But she was choosing to heal anyway, choosing to open herself to possibility anyway, choosing to believe that what had happened didn't have to determine what would happen next. She finished the last of her now cold coffee, savoring it despite the temperature, and smiled to herself. It was a small smile, tentative but genuine, acknowledging both the pain she had endured and the hope she was allowing herself to feel. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments of doubt, new fears to face. But tomorrow would also bring new possibilities, new moments of joy, new reasons to keep moving forward. For tonight, though, she was exactly where she needed to be. On a balcony, holding a green ceramic mug, looking out at a city full of lights and possibilities. 7 months ago, this spot had been the site of her world's destruction. Tonight, it was the site of her quiet triumph, the triumph of survival, of resilience, of choosing to keep going even when the path forward was unclear. Genevieve turned and walked back into her apartment, leaving the balcony door open so the evening breeze could flow through. She had a therapy appointment tomorrow afternoon. She had a date with Nathan on Friday. She had a life to live, full of work and friends and possibilities both scary and exciting. She had herself, stronger and more aware than she had ever been, carrying scars that would always be part of her story, but would no longer be the only thing her story contained. And as she set the empty mug in the sink and prepared for bed, Genevieve felt something she hadn't been sure she would ever feel again. She felt ready. Not for everything, not for every challenge that would come her way, but ready for tomorrow, ready for the next step, ready to continue the journey of becoming whoever she was meant to be after everything that had happened. The betrayal would always be part of her history, but it would not be her entire future. And that, she realized as she turned off the lights and settled into bed, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.